Um, Seems to be time now, so I'll just get started. So, hey everyone, thanks for coming to my talk. I just wanted to, before we get started, share a little piece of information with you. So today is actually my first ever conference talk, so I'm really excited to be here with you all, and I think it's going to be really good. So go easy on me, okay? Okay, so I'd like to get started by sharing a little bit about who I am. So hi again, everyone. My name is Vanessa. I'm Mexican-American, and I've been living here in Germany for about 4 years now. I moved to Germany from California, and initially I was living in Köln, and now I'm living here in Berlin. So also something I'd like to share with you is for the past couple years, I've been working primarily as a front-end engineer. So that means I've been working with technologies like JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and things like that. So it wasn't until recently that I started getting into Go and back-end technologies. And that actually happened because at the company that I work at, which is called Ecosia here in Berlin, I got a really special opportunity to start working together with the infrastructure team on more DevOps-related things, and I even joined the on-call rotation. So through that, I was exposed to more back-end technologies, and I was really surprised. I loved it immediately. I was so compelled by it, and I've had a lot of moments where I've been like, do I still like front-end? Like, I don't know. So here I am today, and we'll see how it goes. I'd like to reiterate that by no means do I consider myself to be a Go expert. I'm still definitely on that learning journey, but these are some of the tools that I interact with on a regular basis and that have really helped me to become more curious and have more opportunities to work with Go. So these are a couple tools that are built in Go, and so on the left we have Kubernetes, and on the right we have Terraform, and then in the middle here we have Docker. And these are a couple of the tools that I use now on a very regular basis, in addition to working with like general front-end things. So when I initially submitted this talk, I was really trying to think about ways in which I could help people become better and more efficient at learning. And then I stopped and I reflected on how my learning path has worked throughout the past couple years. And I realized that while in the beginning my learning was quite independent, recently it's become also collaborative. So on a regular basis, I work together with other engineers who mentor me. And then I also now have been mentoring other junior engineers who are trying to learn not only front-end, but other skills as well. So I've decided to break this talk up into 2 parts, and the first part will be about people who are trying to get better at learning, and the second part will be about mentoring. So can I just get a show of hands for who's starting out learning Go, or just starting out learning something in general? Nice. And who in here is also a mentor or trying to become a mentor? Cool, so it's like pretty much everyone. First, we're going to get started on learning. So if we do a quick web search and we look for example, the best, most effective way to learn something, you'll find that there are a bunch of results that may or may not work to you. And after doing research on how I can best learn something, I realized that actually not really any of the tips that I found online really worked for me. So the tips that I'm about to get into are things that really helped me and might even be good for you. So the first tip is to find a project that really excites you. Most recently, in the past year, I started working on a Go project, and so there are developers at my company who write Go all the time, but as I was trying to get into Go on my own, I tried to pick something that would be easy for me to get into. So I went onto a educational website and I picked a Learn How to Write Go program. And I started writing, and the project was to write a card game written in Go. And so I spent a couple days working on this project, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then by the end of the week, I realized that I wasn't really interested in working on this project anymore. So I had to really take a step back and ask myself, why am I not interested? Is it because I'm not interested in Go? Is it because I'm not interested in back-end technologies? What is it? And after doing a little bit of thinking, I realized it's not that I'm not interested in Go, or not that I'm not interested in backend, learning more about backend. It's that this project is boring to me, actually. And I feel like very oftentimes, as developers, especially at the beginning of your career, you feel like when you start to commit to something, you have to follow through. And while that is true, we definitely have to develop a skill for actually being able to follow through. It's definitely okay to say, this project is boring to me, I'd rather work on something else. So what I then ended up doing was, rather than continuing to work on this little project that actually didn't excite me, I went to work the next day and I said to some of the other Go developers, hey, do you mind if we start pairing together? I'd like to learn more about the actual code base that we have here. Maybe we have small tasks that I can pick up and that can help me get better at Go. So most recently, I've been writing a lot of configuration in Terraform, and that has really been a way for me to not only start learning about that particular technology, but also have a way to work on something that really compels me and really excites me. So the next point is to share your learnings with someone else. After work, every day when I come home, I greet my partner, who is sitting right here in the audience, and I ask him about his day. We talk about all of those things, but then I say to him, hey, today I learned about this. Can I tell you a little bit about it? And while I am interested in sharing what it was that I learned, selfishly, I also want to challenge myself to repeat what it was that I learned and see whether or not I actually can recall from memory. So I'll start to share, like today, I covered this, and this, and this, and this, and then what will happen is that he's also a developer, so he'll probably start to ask me questions like, oh, I don't know what you meant by this, can you explain this? And it really becomes a small exercise and an easy way for me to repeat what it was that I learned. The next point is to try and take notes by hand or in a way that's different to the way that you usually approach learning. The past couple weeks, I've been reading a lot about the hundreds of AWS services that are available, and I don't know about the rest of you, but there's so much to learn and so much to read that sometimes after a long day of just reading documentation, I just, everything goes in one ear and comes out the other. So what I try and do is I say to myself, okay, I can see that I'm getting flustered. I can see that things aren't starting to make sense. Things are starting to mesh together. So what I'm going to do is read something, and then I'm going to challenge myself to come up with a 1-sentence or 2-sentence summary that really captures what it is that I just learned. So then I'm not letting myself get off the hook by reading all of this documentation and then being like, cool, I learned it. I have to actually see if I did learn it or not by writing something down. And then it's also a practice in repetition. Another interesting story about this is that one of the first programming classes I took in college was Java. And when I showed up to class, I brought my laptop. I didn't really know much about development other than MySpace, HTML. So I showed up to school and I had my laptop, and my professor said to us, put your laptops away, there's not going to be computers allowed in this class. And I was like, that's kind of weird. I thought programming meant computers, and sure. So he said to us, all you're going to need is pencil and paper. And everyone, I was looking around at everyone, I was sitting in the back, and I was looking around at everyone, and everyone was kind of like, this is weird, I paid a shitload of money for this laptop and now I can't use it, fine. And what he really made us do then is not write thousands and thousands of lines of code by hand, but rather he made us start to practice writing functions, really learn the foundational pieces of Java, and do that by hand in tiny little bits so that we could get into our memories like, this is what a variable is supposed to look like, this is what this is supposed to look like. And if you ask me whether or not that worked, I don't remember because that was 8 years ago or something. But at the time, it was different. And yeah, I think it worked because I ended up passing that class with an A. So the next point is to understand that it's okay not to remember every piece of syntax by memory. One of the things that I found myself experiencing when I first started working as a developer is that I would show up to work, and then I would see my peers, my colleagues, my friends, and they would all be rock star developers and like typing out all these lines of code every single day. And so I was under the false impression that they somehow knew all of this by memory. So I felt quite bad, and I would be like, oh, I don't understand, why am I not able to memorize all of these things? And then through time and through experience, then I realized, oh, actually, they don't know these things by memory. They look stuff up, and it's okay to look things up. And I do want to add that through practice and repetition as developers, we definitely do learn and memorize little bits and pieces here and there. But for the most part, I'm willing to bet a large amount of money that nobody is able to remember every single thing by hand. You just have to look it up. So just remember that it's definitely okay to look stuff up. And the last point is that after a long day of reading a ton of documentation or trying to brute force through something, what you should try and do is just step away and eat a good meal and get some rest. I can say from experience, these past couple weeks have been really exciting for me. I'm now working not with front end, but with more back end technologies, and I'm super excited, I'm super driven and motivated. And at the end of the day, I still really want to keep going. I don't want to stop working. But what I'm noticing is that I'm feeling tired. It takes a few more turns for me to start learning stuff. And so then I have to say to myself, okay, you know what? You should just stop, go get some food, maybe go take a walk, take a breath of fresh air, and then you can just come back to this tomorrow. And then when I do come back tomorrow, then I realize that I'm actually able to recall things a lot better from memory. Okay. So the next portion is mentoring. I mentioned a bit earlier that when I was thinking about how to put this talk together, I wanted to purely include a part about people who are on a learning journey. But then I realized that as of late, I've been having a lot of interactions with more senior developers who are now trying to become better mentors. And one of the things that I noticed that really, really stands out to me is that for some reason, there's a common misconception that as senior developers, or as developers in general, as people in general, mentoring is something that comes to us naturally, or mentoring is a skill that we're born with. And that's definitely not true, because as people, we're not born knowing things. We have to learn things. We have to strengthen that skill through practice. So as mentors, there's definitely a lot of opportunity for us to continue to improve and get better at helping other people who are now on their learning journey. So, one of the favorite things that I like to do is to encourage my mentee to take me through the process. So, what does this mean? So, when you're working together with someone, if you're pairing or however you call it at your company, you can see that the person you're working with, your mentee, is visibly frustrated. They've hit a roadblock, they're blocked, they've been trying to brute force through something for a long time, and they come to you and they say, I don't know what the hell's going on. I definitely have had this experience before. I keep running into this error, and I don't know how to unblock myself. I've tried to web search the error message, nothing. I'm having no luck. So, a good way to start here as a mentor is to say to your mentee, okay, you know what, first, let's grab some water, let's go for a walk, let's grab some coffee. Just try and take them away from the fact that they're really frustrated right now. So you go and you get some water, you come back to your laptop, and then you say to your mentee, okay, so let's start from the beginning. Let's start from the top. Take me through the task that you're working on. What is it that you're trying to achieve? And then so you're slowly easing into this task with your mentee, and then you're showing them, okay, this is something that I really want to talk about. So then slowly they're going to start explaining to you what it is that they have to do, and oftentimes what will happen is they will probably realize that they knew the answer the whole time, and all they needed to do is use you as a rubber duck, just to have someone to really bounce ideas off of. So I definitely know from experience that it really helps to say to someone, let's just pause, and then really talk through each of the points that we've been trying to get through. The next point is refrain yourself from trying to immediately unblock the person that you're working with. As developers, we're extremely driven, curious, motivated people. And when we see someone who is stuck or has a problem, our first instinct is to unblock them. We've been writing Go, we've been writing these technologies for so many years. It's very easy for us to unblock this person from this problem. But that, in doing so, will only remove that opportunity, that learning opportunity, from the individual who's trying to learn how to solve that problem on their own. So, similar to the previous point that we touched on, rather than saying to them, oh, that's easy, the answer is this, this, and this, really try and guide them through the process, and then try and identify yourself where you can tell the person is sort of veering off, where maybe they're misinformed about something. Don't give them the answer, because the next time they're definitely going to run into, if not this exact problem, they're going to run into a similar problem, and what will happen is that they're not going to be able to solve it because you gave them the answer last time, and they're probably going to come back to you again, and then you're just in this loop of not being able to have your coworker progress because they're not given the opportunity to work through things themselves. The next part is try and refrain as best you can from using words like obviously, easy, just, simply. So I can definitely recall the feeling of starting to work with Kubernetes and having people say things like, oh, it's so easy, it's just this or this. And so what happens then is I start to work with said technology, and if I don't instantly get it within 5 minutes, then I realize that I would say to myself, what's happening? Am I stupid? Is it something that's wrong with me? This person who's very intelligent and that I trust said it's obvious. They said it's easy. And so then I start to doubt myself. So what happens is that I had to step back and really think about what was happening here. And then I realized, actually, what is easy to this person is not necessarily easy to me, and what is obvious to you won't be obvious to someone else. And so we don't gain much from using words like this, because words like obviously, easy, and just are subjective. So we want to be as efficient and kind as possible, so try your best to not use these words. It'll happen. It'll definitely happen. No one's perfect. But if you start to become mindful of the fact that you use these words, slowly and surely you'll be able to practice and stop using them as much. The next point is to ask for feedback. So, as mentors, we're in a really interesting position now, because we're not necessarily learning about how to program. We've been doing this for a couple years now, so that skill is strong by now. But what we're still doing is learning, right? So now we're not learning about programming necessarily, but we're learning about a different skill, which is about how to work with people. And I feel like working with people is actually a lot more challenging at times than learning how to code. Because if I'm trying to learn about Go, I can go onto the Go documentation, I can do a tutorial, and I can read about the definitive way to do X, Y, or Z. But when it comes to interacting with people, people are different. You never know, there's no manual that you can read on people. So it's an ever-evolving and growing process for people. So a way to be able to ask for feedback is, for example, you're pairing with someone or you're working with someone, you can send them a message on Slack or you can send them an email, not just them necessarily, but anyone that you've been working with, and you can say something like, hey, so I've really been enjoying these pair programming sessions we've been having. Do you have any feedback for me? Because I'd like to get better or see if there's anywhere I can improve. That's one way of doing that. The second way is to really ask the individual that you're working with, hey, so what is your preferred method for working together? I've been touching the keyboard a lot, but maybe you want to have a chance and just guide the whole process. What works for you? And it might be that this person hasn't had a chance to develop their preferences yet, but that's okay, because you can just try different things, and eventually both you and the individual will learn more about how you both like to work together. And as people with more seniority and more experience, it's important to be able to be adaptable, because as lead developers, we're going to come into contact with other people who look to us to help guide them and help bring them along on that growth path. So we never stop learning, and it's really important to remember that. And I'd like to close off by saying that people learn in different ways, and the tips that I just mentioned have been things that have worked for me, both as someone who's gone through this learning process, but also who's now helping other people as both a mentor and someone who still works together with mentors, so as a mentee. So you can definitely try or recommend these tips to someone that you know. And if they don't work for you, that's okay, because you're an individual and you should absolutely try and see what works best for you. Thank you. I think we have some time for questions, if anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for a great talk. I was wondering, could you talk about an experience that you've had maybe with someone that has been mentoring you, or someone that's been in a more senior position, maybe something that hasn't worked, and like how you've been able to bring that up with that person? Because I think when you're the more junior person, it can be quite difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've definitely had a couple experience with like more senior lead developers, and yeah, one of the things that I've noticed is that like a lot of them still have difficulty in terms of the mentorship aspect. And so I think what really has helped me is the fact that my personality, I'm not necessarily one to shy away from something, so I might get a little bit nervous in the beginning, but then the next day I'll come back and I really will try and communicate with the person that I'm working with. So I definitely have had instances where I've had mentors try and force their learning way onto me. So they'll say things like, you need to do this, you need to do this, and you need to do this. And as someone who is just starting out, that feels like, okay, well, they are objectively more experienced than I am, so if their method doesn't work for me, then something must be wrong with me. And it wasn't until like time passed that I realized, oh, actually, they just didn't have a better way of explaining to me that like their way of working together with people isn't necessarily the way that I need to approach that. So yeah, I think it's really important that we realize that learning is very individual, and one of the best things that I can advise you as people who are working together with other developers is to really try and communicate and be open to the fact that there are many ways that people will learn. And one of the things that I didn't mention, but for those of you who are still who are here and are mentors, another really, really helpful way is to have some clarity on what it is that you're doing. So you should have some structure for yourself as a mentor. This is what I'm going to be working on with this developer. At some point, we're going to move on to this, and then you should try and bring it all back together, right? Because otherwise, it's like, sure, you can be working together with people on a regular basis, but like if you don't tie that all back together, it might have just slipped away from the person, and then you also lose that experience of like being a really effective teacher to people.
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you carve out space for learning in a company where there is maybe not dedicated learning time, or where just growth for the sake of growth is not necessarily part of the values?
Yeah. So I've been working as a developer for a few years now, and I think it's only now that I'm realizing the fact that it's okay to take time, and it's necessary to take time, carve out time for yourself as someone who's trying to learn. When I first started out, I felt a lot of pressure to just deliver, so I would focus on really solving the task rather than trying to learn how to solve the task so that I could then work on something similar next time. So my advice to you on how to really carve time out for yourself is to, firstly, like, you have to do it. You have to really do it and commit to it. And preferably, you should talk to your team about it. So you should say to your team, like, hey, I'm just starting out learning this. I would really like to take time, whether that can be an hour or two a week. And I'd really like to be able to focus on this because I feel like as someone who's just learning this technology, I'll really be able to bring a lot more value to the team. And hopefully, like, they'll be able to support you in that. You should definitely try doing that. The past couple weeks, I started working a lot with Terraform configuration, and in the beginning, I was like, the senior developer at my company was like, we have examples of how we configured this S3 bucket, so you can just look at that, but I would encourage you not to. So I said to myself, I'm not going to look at how someone else did it because I don't want to just copy and paste the code. I really want to make sure that I digest how to do this. So I spent about 2 days going through like the Terraform documentation and really setting up a project, and I'll admit that I did feel a little bit guilty for spending that time in the beginning. I felt like, crap, like I haven't delivered anything, I haven't pushed anything to production today, all I did was do this. But actually, then when I went back to work a few days later, I realized that I knew a lot about Terraform, and I was able to look at this configuration, and I felt super comfortable, and like I set up multiple buckets and CDNs, and I felt super comfortable doing that, and this was knowledge that I now as a front-end developer had and that my colleagues who are not back-end developers didn't have, and so that was knowledge that I now then had the potential to share with them. So there's so much value in making time for yourself to learn. You really have to it's a balance. You have to ask your company to give you that permission, and hopefully they do because they should see the value, but then also you just have to go for it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about a bit pessimistic scenario. We might also encounter juniors who maybe are not so keen to learn. I think they are okay with writing mediocre code, and well, when I try politely suggesting some things can be made better, maybe better standards now, it sometimes gets pushy, and we probably don't want to hustle the working culture much, because if we are in every environment where people don't want to learn, well, we might get stuck easily in such a place. So I would ask you for advice. What you think how to work with juniors who actually doesn't want much to learn?
So I don't think I've ever come into contact with a junior developer who wasn't interested in learning. Although I don't doubt that there are these people who do exist, who are just, want to come to work and then write some code and then go home. Firstly, I'd like to start by saying that it's okay to just be a developer, so to speak. I think oftentimes we forget about the fact that not everyone wants to become a senior lead, or some people just want to show up to work and are not really passionate about code, and I think that's okay. However, I will say maybe if that's what your team isn't looking for, then it's definitely important to communicate that to the person. Like, hey, this is what we would like to see from you. Like, we recognize that you have a lot of potential. This is why we hired you. And we'd really like you to work together with us. How can we find a plan that will work for you, that will gauge your interest, to really make sure that you level up to this skill? I think, that's probably the best thing I can say to you. Okay. Also, I don't know if you have any sort of, it sounded to me like maybe when you give feedback on the code that they write, they're not interested in doing any fixes on it. I think you should definitely reflect on the policies that you have at your company in terms of where this is happening. So for example, at Ecosia, we have a rule for, as developers, when we push code into GitHub, we're only reviewing not on preference of code writing style. We're reviewing on effectiveness, and we don't want to get too nitpicky about it. Mm-hmm. So what we then do is we review the code, see if it works, see if there's no mistakes, and it should definitely be held up to a certain standard. But you can always come back and iterate on that code. So if you don't want to like make someone feel bad and block them necessarily, you can allow them to push that into production, and then you can create another ticket for them and say, hey, so great work on this task. I'd like to iterate on this together with you. I noticed that you approached it in this way, and like I mentioned in the talk, you can have them take you through why it was that they approached the problem in that way. And then you can say to them, I'd like to share with you an alternative way of solving this, and this is my why you might want to consider approaching this problem in this way rather than this way. And then you don't like necessarily say to them, you're wrong and I'm right, but you open up the possibility for a conversation between the two of you.
Sure, thanks. Any more?
Nice. Okay, thanks everyone.